Well, moving on now, Washington urged members of the UN to back its resolution on the war in Ukraine, despite controversial wording. According to diplomatic sources, it omits any reference to Ukrainian territory occupied by Russia, instead calling for a swift end to the conflict without mentioning Kyiv's territorial integrity. Now, just prior to that, the White House claimed that progress was made towards reaching an agreement that would have provided the U.S. with access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals and also strengthened the long-term relationship between Washington and Kyiv, though Trump's rhetoric again suggested otherwise. Take a listen.
I've had very good talks with Putin, and I've had not such good talks with Ukraine. They don't have any cards, but they play it tough. But we're not going to let this continue.
Well, for more, France 24's international affairs commentator Douglas Herbert joins me on set. Hi there, Doug.
Hi,
so
Erin.
this has obviously been an extremely dramatic week that's brought a bit of upheaval to the world order, but I think it's perhaps still way too early to know just how much it's going to affect things in the short to long future.
Yeah, look, it's probably fair to say a lot of our viewers are getting sick of hearing pundits like myself talk about how dramatic and what an upheaval this week was. The convulsions in the world order, nothing will be like it was before. But we still have a right to, even at the end of this dramatic week, we still have a right to be a little bit shocked, because objectively it is sort of shocking in the sense that for all intents and purposes, the U.S. essentially has switched sides, 80 years after the end of World War II. Just a few months ago, not very long ago, it seems like a century ago, you had the former Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying about the Ukraine policy, U.S.-Ukraine policy, our support will not wane, our unity will not break. Wow, how far that policy has come. In the span of just a few days, you had Donald Trump basically blaming Ukraine for being responsible for starting the war, even though it was the one that was invaded. He called Zelensky a dictator, and he started talking about how he wanted to have these talks with Putin. Putin became the friend, Zelensky became the enemy. Now, to be fair, by the end of the week, Donald Trump, as he often does, he says things and then walks them back a little bit, modifies them. There's a sense of a lot of unpredictability in his rhetoric, tweaking things that he said or he didn't really say it or unsaying it. He sort of walked back some of that Zelensky's a dictator rhetoric by saying, well, yes, Russia attacked, but they shouldn't have let him attack, meaning Putin. So in other words, Ukraine is still at fault for having let Russia invade it, according to Trump's words, on February 24th, 2022. So we still have this sort of stop the world, I want to get off scenario a little bit, where what was true a few months ago, what seemed to be the world order that everyone had come to accept for 80 years of post-war, all of a sudden has been radically flipped on its head. And while you're right, things are far from being certain how they are going to pan out. It's too black and white simplistic to basically say, well, Trump is now, in the Putin camp, hates Ukraine. Ukraine's never going to be at the negotiating table. Neither is Europe. They're all sidelined and locked out. Too early to say that, right? Trump's unpredictability also could play in favor of this going any which way down the road. And Trump ultimately wants to win. And if winning means not being humiliated by Vladimir Putin, he'll do what it takes to make it look like he's winning. So while I'll say, yeah, we don't know where this is going, at the end of this week, it has been, as you said, extremely dramatic. And yes, there is still a sense of we're still seeing the stars around us, almost like a concussion from that fall. And people are still reeling and still shocked. And it's going to take a little bit of time between, like I said, pundits like myself not sounding so breathless when we talk about this.
Well, as this international affairs hangover of sorts continues for much of the world, looking ahead, there has been talk of discussions between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in the days ahead. And then there's, of course, that UN resolution that we've been talking about throughout the day with language that Ukraine is certainly not likely to appreciate.
Absolutely. Let's take the first part, the talks about the talks, right? And that's what it is at this point. Talks about talks. It had been thought earlier that there would be talks, a summit between Trump and Putin as early as the end of this month. Looks like that timeline is being pushed back a little bit. The Russians, if anything, are still cautious. While, yes, this has been a banner week in geopolitics for Putin in many senses. I agree with the commentators, observers, Russia watchers who say this is the type of thing Putin's been dreaming of for a while, finally getting the U.S. to align itself with Russia's position with regard to the world and the security architecture of Europe and all of that, and NATO. So it is a dream. But it's still wary. Putin is still wary. It's not accepting that it is totally won over, is not calling victory quite yet, even if state media was gleeful this week. According to Russia's deputy foreign minister, a man named Sergei Ryabkov, he says that the talks are underway. And when they do happen, perhaps in the next couple of weeks, we'll have teams getting together to actually arrange the summit. Venue yet to be determined, probably not Saudi Arabia again. It will be talks on not just Ukraine, but on what the Russians see as broader global issues. That is shorthand for Russia trying to get the U.S. on board with what Putin hopes is a complete reordering of the post-war security architecture of Europe, where NATO would be retreating from Russia's borders, where American troops would presumably be withdrawn, so on and so forth. As for that UN resolution, it is a brief draft version that's been floated, right? Usually in the past, if there was going to be on the third anniversary of this war, which it will be on Monday, the third anniversary of Russia's invasion, it would have been something that probably, the whole international community, minus maybe China and Russia, would be on board with. But now you have the U.S. pitted against Ukraine and EU in its language. You might say that the wording is splicing, semantic splicing and dicing. But in the U.S. version, they talk about a, quote, lasting peace, right? In the EU-Ukraine version, they talk about a lasting and just peace. The devil's really in the semantic details there, Erin, because that just part is really what's up for geopolitical grabs right now. So that resolution is going to be the U.S. wants to bring it before the UN Security Council Monday, the 24th, third anniversary, before bringing it before the 193-member General Assembly.
The paradox being, of course, that whether or not it's lasting perhaps does depend on whether or not it's just, at least in the eyes of
yeah, the
Ukraine.
two are intertwined, absolutely.
So finally, Doug, you mentioned what Putin wants to see in this potential new world order, and a lot of that obviously hinges on the results of the elections in Germany tomorrow, Sunday. What do you think we can expect to see if the front runner does win after these German elections are finished?
Yeah, in a nutshell, look, Friedrich Merz, the leader of the center-right CDU party, is tipped to be the next chancellor. Sure, it might not happen, but it's going to happen probably. He has been very clear in warning Europe that it can no longer, most likely, be able to depend on the U.S. as providing a security umbrella for the Europeans. So he's been basically saying we can't even, he was asked, well, what about the U.S. stepping in and honoring Article 5? An attack against one is attack against all in NATO. He said, look, I would never be able, I'd certainly not bet all my money, essentially, on that. He's sort of, sitting on the fence. He doesn't want to say, but he probably not. So he's taking a very cautious standpoint, telling the Europeans, yeah, we actually really do have to bang our heads together. We have to do something because we can't rely on the U.S. anymore. And he's even suggested, and I'll just leave you with this thought, he's even suggested, because Germany doesn't have nuclear weapons, right, that he would have to be reliant at some point on British and French nuclear sharing. That is putting Germany and the rest of Europe under a British-French nuclear umbrella. They're the ones with the nuclear weapons. Wow, how the world has changed.
And we'll see how Washington will react to all of that if it's indeed confirmed. Douglas Herbert, thank you very much.